Malakei Elyon, Melech Malakei Hamlak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
The book of Hebrews is not called the book of Hebrews. In Latin and the Greek, it's referred to as a book about the Hebrew people, and that's how it acquired the name, the book of Hebrews. It's categorized in the letters of the Bible that we call general letters or general epistles. I am not going to bore you or drive myself crazy trying to prove who wrote it. I'm convinced, and I will refer to the author, and I will share with you my opinion of who that author is and the reason I believe he's that author, but I'm not going to belabor that point because it can't be proven. And for every point I can make about believing that Rabbi Saul of Tarsus wrote the book, there's another 100 teachers that could give you 100 good reasons why they believe that other people wrote the book. So I'm not going to belabor that point. It's not so much who wrote it that I'm going to teach about, but why it was written. If I could refer you back, and I was trying to associate Tuesday night and the teaching on Matthew with these lessons. I've got it, but I don't always communicate it. Judaism had been reconstituted in the revival of finding the Torah, finding the temple, finding the language that we read about in the book of Ezra. They went through the 70 years of the captivity as a judgment for what happened. The temple was destroyed, Jerusalem was destroyed, and so was their hope. So with the revival, with Ezra, with Nehemiah, with Zerubbabel, with the building of the temple, there began a renewed hope. Not only a hope of freedom, but a hope for the Messiah. In the 11th century, when Maimonides codified most of what we would know, what some would call the doctrinal statement of Judaism, the 13 principles of the Jewish faith, Maimonides said, I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah. And though he tarry, I will wait daily for his coming. A hope and a longing for not only physical freedom, but spiritual freedom, and that spiritual freedom would come with the Messiah. But to these people who had the covenants, who had the word, who had the laws, the statutes, and the judgments, who had the responsibility of teaching the Word of God. With these people came the hope of Jerusalem. And with Jerusalem, the hope of the temple. And without a temple, things just seemed like they would be hopeless. So here are the believers, the very core foundation of first century believers. And they're on the Mount of Olives, and they are across the valley from the temple. And what is their first question? They call to him and they acknowledge the temple. And they ask him, when will these things be and what will be the sign of your coming? And he goes on, Yeshua goes on to explain that again the temple will be destroyed. Now, although the Olivet Discourse was done in private, when the events of that Passover week were over, when Yeshua was crucified, when Yeshua went through the Roman execution, the death, the burial, and the resurrection, these things did not stay secret. They weren't done in a vacuum. The word of the destruction of the temple that was taught on the Mount of Olives spread throughout the believers, and from the believers into the community. Think about the word community. Your family, let's refer to them later on in the book of Acts. We'll see the name the Way. So let's refer to them that those are of the Way. I don't think the term Messianic had been invented yet. So we're the closest thing to a name. You and your family are part of the Way. You live in Jerusalem, you live near Jerusalem, and you've accepted the Way. Your daughter goes, in the instructions of her mother and the teaching of her mother, your daughter goes into the marketplace, maybe for produce, maybe for a chicken, maybe for flour or barley. And the community has unified itself against you and what you believe. And they say to your daughter, you're not welcome here, you can't buy. Your son, after you have begun to teach him your trade, after you have begun to disciple him into what it is that you do, you're a farmer. You have an orchard. You're producing wonderful grapes in the Judean hill. And you're teaching your boy everything he needs to know. And he goes to take grapes to the grape presser, to the place of the pressing, and to sell the grapes and to bring back money. And they say, your grapes are not welcome here. You go away. You're not part of our community. You have a new baby. God blesses. Your wife and your son have survived in that first century non-medical world of leaning up against a tree and washing your face with water and a clean cloth and giving birth to a child, putting the child to your breast and beginning to nurse the child. And the 8th day comes, and you live close enough to Jerusalem, and you take your boy and your wife for the dedicatory service in the temple. All you want to do is have your boy with Brit Milah, to have him circumcised according to the covenant that God gave Moses. And before you can come up the stairs, before you can go into the outer court, before you can approach the Nicanor gates, word has already spread throughout the entire community. Hey, that's so-and-so. He's from the Way. He's part of the Way. And you walk with your new baby into the temple, and the priest says to you, you're not welcome here. They won't even circumcise your boy. They won't bury your mother. The community began to turn against the believers because the believers believed Yeshua, and the believers told the story concerning the destruction of the temple, and the temple was everything. Without the temple, there was no hope. Yes, there were thousands of people who knew and understood that the Sadducean system in the temple was corrupt. But it was still there. We still had the temple. We still had Solomon's portico. You could still get in line and buy a lamb and change your money, or turtle doves, or the grain offering. But you can't do it because you couldn't go through the mikveh. You couldn't go through the mikveh. You couldn't go up the steps. You couldn't go up the steps. You couldn't go into the temple. You became a spiritual leper. Unclean. unwanted, go away. And the hope began to be broken. The believers in those days were an intensely persecuted people. And then there were the Romans. God forbid that a Roman soldier should pass you and he was carrying a burden. You think you drive on these modern interstate highways and you think you see mile markers, and what a great idea. You know, they had them on the Roman roads from the 10th Legion. When the 10th Legion would build, the greatest building army in the world said all roads lead to Rome. And when the 10th Legion would build, they would build mile markers. Oh, not mile markers by 5,280 feet, but they would build incremental markers. And a soldier passed you, and he put his pack down and looked at you, and you had to pick it up, and you had to carry it 1 Roman mile. But you know what the believers taught? You know what these insane believers from the way, you know what they taught? They taught to submit to the Romans. If he tells you to carry it 1 mile, take it another. And they became associated with being friends with the Romans. The Romans persecuted them. The unbelievers persecuted them. And they were in a horrible, horrible position, breaking their hope. When we describe the tabernacle, and when we talk about the tabernacle, understand that the tabernacle was now enclosed in the days of the Messiah in a physical building. It proved that the Lord wanted to fellowship with his creation. Exodus 25:22, I will communicate with you from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim, which are upon the ark of the testimony. And the Lord's desire to fellowship with mankind found its fulfillment, its full flowering. It found its creation in Yeshua, the Messiah, who came to establish the hope, who came to establish the kingdom, who came to establish the hope of a kingdom. So a thorough understanding that everything revolved around the temple is completely necessary to understand the Book of Messianic Jews. The Book of Messianic Jews cannot be picked up by the average church. The Book of Messianic Jews cannot be picked up by people who practice this kind of so-called Christianity, and it cannot be understood. And I'm not saying I have some miracle rug. I'm not saying I have some miracle information. I'm not saying I have some miracle insight. I'm saying I have the Word. And you cannot take 3/4 of the Word and throw it out and say that you understand the Book of Hebrews. It just can't be. It'll be a challenge for me to unteach you some of the things that keep you from believing the Book of Hebrews. It'll be a challenge for both of us. But it was a challenge for the first century believers themselves. Now, when you read the commentaries, and I'm going to step over here and talk to you about a book a minute. An old book written in the 19th century, written by a Jewish man who became an Episcopal priest and a scholar. Now, you know I don't recommend a lot of books. I really don't. And the books I do recommend, I don't have to agree with everything that's inside of them. But this old book that's been reprinted, called The Temple and Its Ministry and Services, will explain so much to you about the Book of Hebrews. It's amazing. Alfred is a tremendous author. But more than that, he was a tremendous scholar. He was willing to step out and to take a stand and to be different. But he reestablished in those of us who want to be Bible teachers, he reestablished the hope. A hope in us that we could teach people about the temple, and that from the temple we could teach people about the book of Hebrews. Very, very few scholars, very, very few teachers understand the intense pressure of the early Messianic believers in the first century that I just described to you. Sometimes we feel a little pressure. But you can't imagine. I can't imagine. I can't fathom what it was like. They couldn't go to the mikveh. They couldn't circumcise their boy. They couldn't dedicate their daughter. They couldn't bury their mother. They were ostracized outside of the community. And it's no wonder that in the brokenness of that hope, that the leader of the community in Jerusalem, we call him James in the English. James is not even in the Bible. Yaakov, the Lord's half-brother. It's no wonder that he reached out to someone to help him, help his community with this breaking of the hope, this being ostracized, this being put outside. Now here's the scenario. We've got Rabbi Saul of Tarsus, that's commonly called the Apostle Paul. We've got his ministry partner Barnabas, who went out from Jerusalem, who went into the diaspora, who went into the dispersion. They reported back to the community in Jerusalem several times, but of course you're very familiar with the Jerusalem Council and the Acts 15 passage. So here we have Yaakov and Rabbi Saul and Barnabas, who were close, intimate ministry partners. Now, whether it was Saul or Barnabas, I don't know, and I'll never be able to prove it to you. But he reached out to them for help with the hope. Without the temple, now the temple, in my never to be humble opinion, the temple is still standing, but the believers are being ostracized from the temple. Their hope is being broken. Their testimony is being hurt. They are understanding that under the Roman occupation that the temple is going to be destroyed again, which will break the hope of Jerusalem. But burning in the hearts of these people, the Hebrew people, the people that we call the Jewish people, burning in their hearts is always a hope. Is always a hope. In the pogroms, in the turn of the century, when Edersheim was writing in London, in the pogroms in Europe, when the Jews were being driven from village to village to village. You have the fictional village of Anatevka. And the people, the Russian constable comes and he explains to Tevye that you have to get out, you have to leave, the government is going to come in, there's going to be a pogrom. And the pogrom comes. And then the rulings come down. They have to leave. Who are they going to sell their homes to? The cows. Tevye's milk cows. Who's going to buy Tevye's milk cows? He has to walk away from them to break their hope. And one of the townspeople comes to the rabbi and said, Rabbi, wouldn't this be a good time for the Messiah to come? And the rabbi said, yes, son, it would. But we'll have to wait for him somewhere else. No matter what happened, there was always the hope. There was always that hope. Throughout the history of the world, Jewish people, there's a potted plant called the wandering Jew, driven from place to place. You know why so many Jews play the violin? The piano is a hard instrument to carry. They teach the children the love of music, and they take the violin with them. Oh, and not that there's not a lot of great Jewish pianists, but it's the illustration that teaches that you have to be ready to move, but not give up the hope. And you and I, to understand the Book of Messianic Jews, to feel the Book of Messianic Jews, to feel the pain of the early Jewish believer that was being addressed to these Messianic Jews, you have to understand that hope. And Rav Shaul, working with his partner in ministry in Jerusalem, Yaakov, Rav Shaul is revived, enlightened. He's excited about what he sees going on around the world, and that there is a hope for the Messiah. And he brings that hope back to these people that have been literally broken in spirit in Jerusalem. These people that you'll see that want to put down their Judaism, that want to hide their faith in the Messiah, that want to hide and go back to the temple worship. The corrupt temple worship. And the author says, no, no, no. You can't do that. Because we have a hope. We have that blessed hope. And even though he tarry, I will wait daily for his coming. That's what the Book of Messianic Jews is all about. That's what we're going to see. That's what we're going to investigate. That's what we're going to go through step by step by step. God, who in different times and different ways spoke to us through the Father's past, is now speaking to us through Yeshua, the Messiah. That hope, that blessed hope. And that's what we're going to investigate, look at. That's what we're going to dissect. That's what we're going to take apart in the Book of Messianic Jews. But you've got to understand the temple. You've got to understand that that was their hope. You've got to understand that that was everything. Even as corrupt as it was, without the temple, to them there was no hope. Rabbi Saul told the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, don't you know that you are the temple of the Ruach HaKodesh, and the Ruach, the Spirit, dwells within you? That's that blessed hope that we have. And that's what the Book of Messianic Jews is going to be about. But we thank you for our time tonight, our study, our music, our Shabbat celebration, our praise. We thank you for that blessed hope. Amen.